Hi, everybody, and welcome to Headway, a show that informs our audience about current political issues that affect the local area, the region, and our nation. The Massachusetts primary elections are coming up very soon. DoubleACS will be interviewing candidates for the 4th Congressional District of Massachusetts. For this episode, I'll be chatting with Democratic candidate Jesse Mermell, a former Brookline Select Board Member, advisor to Governor Deval Patrick, and a senior leader at Planned Parenthood. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the show. Like I mentioned in the opener, I'm speaking today with 4th Congressional District candidate Jesse Mermell. Hi, welcome, Jesse. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, no problem. You're welcome. Can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to join this race?
Sure. So, I'm running for Congress to take on Donald Trump and his minions, to fight for Medicare for all and for reproductive rights, and to lead an equitable recovery from COVID-19. And I think the 4th Congressional District deserves a Congresswoman who can provide the bold progressive leadership that's necessary in this moment of overlapping crises when we need to lift up working families. And that's what I've been focused on for the past 20 years here in Massachusetts, from my time leading external affairs at Planned Parenthood, working side by side with Governor Patrick as a member of his senior team, on the front lines in Brookline as a member of the Select Board, and the work I've been doing the past 5 years running the state's progressive business organization, working on the policies that we know are good for families, for workers, for equity, for the environment, but that are also good for business and good for the economy. Things like investing in transportation and healthcare, paid family and medical leave, and so much more. And I got in this race because when I looked at what wasn't coming out of Washington, it was all the work that I've been doing the past 20 years, focusing on working families and equity. And I want to take the muscle that I've built fighting for the families in Massachusetts and the families of the 4th Congressional District, go to Washington and be a part of that fight there.
Yeah, so I've been hearing a lot more progressive talking points, like not just in this race, but like all over the country. More so this year in the presidential primary when there were a bunch of people running. Do you think we've finally reached that moment where progressive policy is going to be happening a lot more in the next few years?
Listen, I hate the way the opportunity has presented itself, but because of COVID, we are seeing in such stark relief what happens when you don't put policies in place to create stability for people, to create equity and opportunity. Imagine where we would be as a country. And I mean this from a public health standpoint and from an economic one. If we had a progressive policy like paid family and medical leave, for example, just one of the many that we need to put into place. Imagine if in the midst of COVID, if you didn't feel well or someone you love wasn't well, you could take time off to care for yourself or care for that person you love without fearing financial ruin. Right? That is smart public health policy. That is smart economic policy. And it's just the type of progressive issue that I've been up to my eyeballs in here in Massachusetts for the past 20 years, and that I want to go to Washington and be a leader on. So, a lot of us who've been doing this work for years know that these progressive policies make good sense in addition to just being the right moral thing to do. But COVID has put a bright spotlight on exactly why we need to advance the progressive policies that those of us in the movement have been beating the drum on for a long, long time.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, speaking of, how the pandemic has kind of spurred that, can you talk a little bit about what your ideas are for pandemic relief? I know there's stuff going on in Congress right now. Bills are being proposed and then not passing. Like, where would you like to see this going with relief for the pandemic?
Well, let's be clear. There are two big things we need to do. We need to get rid of Donald Trump and we need to get rid of Mitch McConnell, because the Democratic House has been passing COVID relief bills. It seems like they're more than I can count that are sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. There's literally a bill that would provide trillions of dollars in aid directly to cities and towns that are trying to figure out school budgets right now and how to reopen safely. That's been sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk for months. So the number one thing we have to do is elect Joe Biden and get rid of Mitch McConnell. But there's some tangible things that I want to fight for when I'm in Congress. One, we need that $600 unemployment check to be back. I was actually in Attleboro over the weekend talking with some folks from the food bank who were saying that as they're seeing that check be taken out of people's hands, they're seeing longer lines and more inquiries at the food bank, because that $600 was the difference between being able to go to the grocery store and get the food that you need to support your family and having to rely on someone else for help. So we need that $600 to be back in people's wallets. A one-time $1,200 check, that's not enough. Anyone who knows anything about working families in this country knows that doesn't cut it. I think we need $2,000 a month for the foreseeable future, more if you're supporting children at home. We need paid family and medical leave. That has to be part of the recovery. There's an early education and care bill that would provide $10 billion over the next 4 years to help our early education centers to make the changes that they need and reopen. That's sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk too. And obviously we need the PPP that we need, the PPE. We need to make sure that there's contact tracing and that when there is a vaccine, it's distributed equitably. So there's a long, long list of things that we need to do, but let's be clear that the obstacle here is political.
Yeah. So just getting back to COVID, kind of, or staying on the topic, how were you campaigning during this time? Like, it must have been incredibly difficult to campaign in a traditional way. So how have you been reaching out to voters?
Well, I'm sure as you've talked to all the other candidates, we all just laugh at this point. We used to see each other every day, multiple times a day. And now on the rare occasion that we run into each other, standing outside of a polling place or at a rally, I almost forget what people look like outside of, this square on the computer. We switched to virtual campaigning immediately in March. Everything from what was supposed to be our campaign headquarters opening, being a sort of MTV Cribs style tour of the office online, to virtual fundraisers, virtual house parties, and community conversations. We've done everything from my staff of amateur astrologers reading my birth chart on Facebook Live one Friday afternoon, which was, I didn't fully understand what was happening, but we all got a kick out of it, to hosting, really important, weighty conversations about mental health with Barry Sanders, who's the president of the Taunton City Council and a social worker for many, many years, talking about the importance of mental health just generally, but in these hard times. And we've done so many virtual events, I can't even count them. We've obviously not knocked on doors, which is something we had really planned on doing. We've moved more to phone banking and text banking and making sure that our volunteers are staying safe and healthy, in addition to keeping voters safe and healthy. But I have to give a big shout out to my team who've been creative and thoughtful and smart about how we put public health first and campaign second, but still connect with voters and activists across the district.
Yeah. So I heard that you recently got 2 endorsements from the Attleboro area, Senator Paul Feeney and State Rep Jim Hawkins. Do you want to talk about those endorsements, why you've connected with those 2 elected officials, and why you think you got those endorsements?
And I'll add State Senator Becca Rausch, who represents the other half of Attleboro, just endorsed us this morning. So the entire Democratic delegation from Attleboro is on board with our campaign, and I'm incredibly honored. Senator Paul Feeney is someone I've known from the labor movement for a long time and have deep respect for the ways in which he has just committed his life to fighting for working families. I've known Representative Hawkins from his fights for public education. I'm proud to have the endorsement in this race of the Mass Teachers Association and the National Education Association. And I used to run Fair Test, the National Center for Fair and Open Testing, where I got to see Rep. Hawkins' incredible passion for ending the misuse of high-stakes standardized testing. And Senator Rausch and I have worked together on a host of issues, particularly around women's reproductive health. I used to run external affairs at Planned Parenthood, and Senator Rausch has been a true champion on a host of issues, but I'm particularly grateful for her leadership on issues of reproductive health. And I'm just proud to have, leaders who know exactly what Attleboro and the surrounding communities need in their next member of Congress, who've kicked the tires on all the candidates in this race. To line up behind me and behind our campaign really means the world. And I'm grateful for the ways in which that we'll be able to partner together when I'm in Washington to make sure that we're delivering real, tangible results for Attleboro.
Can you talk about what your plans are for healthcare? I think you're for Medicare for all. Do you want to talk a little bit about specifically where you are with what you'd like to see happening with healthcare nationally? Sure.
So you're right. I do support Medicare for all. I think it's what we need to have a healthcare system that everyone can access and afford, a system where we don't lay awake at night worrying about prescription drug costs. My own father has been in a battle, and I do mean battle, for the past 16 years with prostate cancer. And a few months ago, he told me what they pay every month, both before he hits the donut hole and then after. My parents are in their 70s. And it's an astronomical amount. And no one should have to deal with that stress of figuring out, can I pay for this medicine that I need to literally save my own life? That is an unjust and immoral choice. And I believe that Medicare for All is the way that we get past that. I will note that folks like Senator Roush and Senator Feeney have been huge champions for Medicare for All. And so it means even more to me to have their support. Listen, with Medicare for All, it means we're going to have coverage for reproductive health and mental health, long-term disability, all of the things that we know contribute to overall well-being and ultimately save us money. And in this moment where we've seen millions of Americans lose their access to health insurance because they've lost their job, at the exact moment when it's in all of our best interest to stay healthy, right? It should be important to you that I stay healthy. And it's important to me that you stay healthy because our fates are intertwined in the midst of this virus. And so to think that someone might lose their ability to access care because they no longer have a job in this system that we've created is madness to me, and all the more reason why we need a system like Medicare for All.
So I know that since you've worked for Planned Parenthood, women's reproductive health is very important to you. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your policy ideas around women's reproductive health are?
Sure. So I used to run external affairs at Planned Parenthood here in Massachusetts. I'm incredibly proud to be endorsed by Planned Parenthood, by NARAL, the National Women's Political Caucus, the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus, and a host of leaders on this issue. There is so much that we have to do to protect reproductive health care in the country and in the 4th Congressional District. So we need to codify Roe in federal law. We need to repeal the Hyde Amendment and ban the global gag rule. We need to protect Title X family planning money, the money the federal government has been giving out since the Nixon administration. This is a program of Richard Nixon's administration to make sure that everyone can afford access to birth control, to STI screening, to cancer screening. And we need to end federal money going to crisis pregnancy centers. And this is a particularly important issue for Attleboro and the 4th Congressional District. There are 3 so-called crisis pregnancy centers in our district. These are fake health centers that purport to offer medical services to women and people seeking reproductive health care, but they don't. They're often affiliated with anti-abortion organizations and often don't have any medical expertise on staff at all. And so people show up seeking care and they get misleading, agenda-driven information that can put their health in jeopardy. I announced my reproductive health care plan in front of this fake center in Attleboro. There's another one in Fall River and another one in Taunton. It's putting the health of people in our district at risk. There's no one else in this race who's talking about it. And it's a really significant part of my reproductive health care plan because it's specifically harming people in our very own district and harming people in Attleboro.
Are those faith-based organizations? Is that what they are?
Some are, not necessarily all, but they are driven by anti-abortion agendas.
Okay. So can you talk about your jobs and economic plans?
So I, for the past 5 years, have been running the Alliance for Business Leadership. It's the progressive business organization in Massachusetts. And we work on the issues that we know tackle economic inequality and social mobility. And so that's really how I've been informed in coming up with my economic growth plan. It means we need to invest in workers and invest in communities. You know, I've already talked a lot about paid leave. I was on the 8-person team that negotiated that here in Massachusetts. It's about, in the short term, of course, shoring up the workers who are without unemployment benefits and who need more than $1,200 in their pocket at a time. We need to make sure we're raising the minimum wage and passing earned sick time. But a big part of our economic path forward has to be the Green New Deal. It is a huge opportunity to tackle the crisis of our time, the climate crisis, and create economic growth. And I know from my time working in the Patrick administration that we've actually already tested out this theory of change here in Massachusetts, right? Over a decade ago, we started investing in a clean energy economy in the Commonwealth. And within short order, we'd created the fastest growing segment of the Massachusetts economy and over 100,000 clean energy jobs that both put money in people's pockets and helped us tackle the climate crisis. So in the 4th Congressional District, the opportunities to create jobs from responsible offshore wind, from energy transmission and storage, and from investing in transportation. I mean, I think about what Representative Hawkins has done and pushing for the South Attleboro train station to finally be revitalized. Those are the types of projects that are completely consistent with a Green New Deal, investing in South Coast Rail, investing more money in GATRA and the regional transit authority that runs between Fall River and New Bedford, so that those bus systems are clean and green and reliable and go to stops that make sense and run more frequent schedules. There's so much that we can do to create economic growth and tackle this other existential threat around climate change. So a Green New Deal is a huge part of my economic plan, in addition to policies that lift up working families like paid leave, raising the minimum wage, and passing earned sick time.
Do you see something like, I think Bristol Community College is doing an offshore wind educational program? I think it's government funded. I don't know how much, if people have to pay or not. Do you see an expansion of those kind of programs as part of that?
Absolutely. Those types of programs make all the sense in the world. And I, in my old role, worked with a business leader in advanced manufacturing, high skills manufacturing up north in Marlboro, who had a similar program, not offshore wind, but they needed folks with the training to hire directly into their company. They partnered with local community colleges so that folks knew there were jobs waiting for them, good jobs, you know, where they would feel valued and rewarded, and our local economy grew. So I've seen firsthand how programs like that can work, and what Bristol Community College is doing to funnel folks into the offshore wind industry makes all the sense in the world to me.
So staying on education, what are your ideas for like pre-K through senior year of high school through 12th grade? I know you're not for the high stakes testing, so the MCAS here would probably have to go away. What other things would you like to see happening?
So I'm really proud to be the candidate in this race who's been endorsed by the Math Teachers Association and the National Education Association. Listen, we cannot reopen until we figure out schools. That includes early education and care. I'm a big supporter of something Congresswoman Clark has been pushing and actually is sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. The early education is infrastructure bill. Again, $10 billion over 4 years to invest in the early education and care system across our country. Listen, that's a racial justice issue. It's an economic justice issue. It's a reopening issue. We have to get that right. We have to invest in early education and care, also because we know the huge impact it has on those early brains, right? On those young kids who are developing. We know that it has a lasting impact throughout their lives. With K through 12, I know everyone's anxious to get back. I haven't talked to a single educator who doesn't want to be back in the classroom with his or her kids. I don't know a single parent who doesn't want their kids back in school. I've talked to a few kids who are fine being out of the classroom, but for the most part, everyone wants schools back in place. I don't want educators and administrators and students and their families to be guinea pigs in a giant public health experiment. And I think that reopening in person puts us at risk of that. So I want to make sure that we're fighting for federal dollars to come to our schools so that when reopening happens in person, it's able to happen safely, that schools have the resources that they need to pay for protective equipment and cleaning equipment, to pay for the additional staff that's going to be necessary for remote learning and hybrid learning over a period, to make sure that students who might not have access to broadband or have access to something like a Chromebook at home have those resources that they need so that as they're learning remotely, they can do so safely. And I'd note that when we talk about education, we have to talk about the larger social determinants of health that impact whether or not a student is ready to learn. And the number one thing on my mind right now is food insecurity. So we've seen a flood of interest and need at our food banks across the 4th Congressional District. And I can't say enough about the ways in which they have stepped up and the ways in which schools, particularly over the summer, have stepped up to make sure that students and families have food on their tables. But we have to expand SNAP benefits. That is the long-term solution. Well, the long-term solution is making sure people have good paying jobs and don't need the assistance in the first place. But until that happens, expanding SNAP benefits so that folks can go to the grocery store, order food online, and support their families as opposed to relying on food banks is what we need. And it's directly tied to the issue of education, particularly during this crisis.
So can you just, I mean, you kind of touched on it, but can you expand on just the inequity between higher income and lower income and the quality of education that people are getting in the public system?
So obviously, education funding is largely tied to property values. And so if you're in a community like Wellesley or Brookline, where property values are pretty high, you have some security knowing that there'll be funding there to support your educational programs. But as I talk to school committee members in Fall River or in Dighton and Rehoboth, they're really, really nervous about what's going to come as their, the money that they see to support their education system is in jeopardy. They don't have a large residential tax base. They're relying on state support. And the state, because the federal government is holding this money hostage, sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk, doesn't know how much money they're going to be able to give to cities and towns to support education coming into the fall. And we know that these inequities existed before COVID. It's why a lot of us fought so hard to pass the Student Opportunities Act, which starting this fall was supposed to begin to tackle those inequities. But again, because money is being held hostage on Mitch McConnell's desk, so much of the progress that was supposed to be made, so much of the work that was going to be done starting this fall to close those equity gaps is on hold. And it means we have to fight harder than ever for the money that's necessary to ensure that communities that haven't been adequately funded, to make sure students have access to every chance and opportunity that they need, have the funding that's necessary to make sure no student is left behind in the midst of a crisis that isn't their fault.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about gun control? I know it's kind of like I'm hopping around on topics, but yeah. So like what kind of policies would you like to see happening around gun control?
I've lived in Brookline for 20 plus years, but I grew up in a small farming town in rural Pennsylvania, 5,000 people, biggest town in the county. We're one of those places where you got the first day of doe and buck season off from school because no one over the age of 13, administrator, teacher, student, you name it, was going to be in school when they could be out in the woods trying to bag a doe or buck. So I come from a place of great respect for hunting and people who feel strongly about guns, but I believe we need common sense gun safety reform. I'm really proud to be a Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate of distinction, and I'm very much committed to making sure that we do things like banning assault weapons, reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, talking about the connection between access to guns and gun violence and suicide, talking about the trauma that exists in our communities because of gun violence, holding gun manufacturers responsible, particularly when we see acts of mass violence, but not exclusively that, and making sure that we are focusing on the broad ways in which gun violence impacts our community. We know that when we see things on the news about school shootings, it is horrific and haunts all of us. But there's gun violence every single day in people's homes, in people's communities, again, related to suicide. And so I want to make sure that we're having a much broader conversation about the impact of gun violence on our communities. And again, very proud to stand with Moms Demand Action. And as someone who comes from a hunting community, we had an extra freezer in our basement for whatever venison my dad brought home. But I really believe that common sense gun reforms are necessary to keep our country safe.
Okay. So if elected to Congress, what is the first bill you'd want to author, that you'd want to write? You can say something about like ones that are already happening that you want to build upon after, but at first, like what's the first original bill you'd want to start up on?
Well, it isn't, in fairness, it isn't an original bill. It's paid family and medical leave. Okay. I know I talked about it already, but the legislature asked me to be one of the 8 people here in Massachusetts to go through an arduous 7-month-long process where we negotiated what's now the strongest paid family medical leave law in the country, something that tackles racial inequity and gender inequity and economic inequity. And given what we are experiencing in this country right now, I really want to take the muscle that I've built on paid leave, in the weeds, fighting every single day to negotiate what has turned into a remarkable bill, and take that to Washington and fight hard for the 4th Congressional District in the entire country to make sure that we have paid family and medical leave.
Yeah. So what committees would you want to serve on?
Transportation and energy and commerce. And I'll tell you why. Transportation is a little bit more straightforward. We have huge transportation needs here in Massachusetts. And we already talked about the train station in South Attleboro, but it's so much more than that. It's our regional transit authorities like GATRA. It's making South Coast Rail happen. Up north, it's the Pike project around I-90. It's the commuter rail. It's the Green Line. The needs are endless and the opportunities are endless to create economic growth, to tackle the climate crisis, to open up new opportunities to housing and improve public health. I would want to see a seat for myself if I get what I ask for on transportation. And then on energy and commerce, it's most likely that any legislation around reproductive health would make its way through the Energy and Commerce Committee. And being one of very few people who are members of Congress, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, who have had direct experience working in the reproductive health world, working in facilities where abortion care is provided, I think that would be really important expertise to offer on the Energy and Commerce Committee as legislation related to reproductive health makes its way through the House.
Okay, so in just a few days, what is it, 8 days left to the primary?
8 days.
8 days.
Yeah.
So in 8 days, if you were to win the primary, you're going to move on to a general. Can you talk about how you would shift gears into a general election? And we have about 2 minutes left.
You know, I'm not sure that much would shift. I've been talking about the same issues since I launched on October 2nd. We've been out in the community in person and virtually throughout the 4th Congressional District, talking about the issues that matter to voters, introducing myself, and we'll just keep doing that through a general election in November. And I'm really focused, as you might imagine, on the primary, but we've got an incredible team, and I know that we'll be able to shift into a general and fight to win that, and then go on to represent the 4th Congressional District in Washington.
All right. Thank you so much for talking to me. It's been great.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Stay safe.
No problem. Thanks to everyone for watching, and stay tuned for another episode of Headway.